Hi, my friends. It is David Ault. I want to welcome you to the gathering. It's always an honor to have you here. And I want to invite you as we're going to travel together in a little boundary pushing and a little practice of what it means to go beyond acceptability, even to really put some integrity into the application of beginner's mind. Are you ready? Okay. So, did you know that the most repeated phrase in Holy Scripture is this: be not afraid, fear not, be not afraid. Beautiful, right? And what's also really beautiful is that that messaging and that lesson is not contained just within the Bible, it's in all holy text. The encouragement for you and I to remember who we are. Because if we remember who we are, there's no need to fear, right? So pause. Who are we? Well, we keep talking about that. We keep trying to feebly put words to that. But what we are in our feeble attempt is pure essence, pure essence. As again, Ram Dass so beautifully and famously said, we are loving awareness. Notice that that is not defining us as a soul, which still has its own kind of form to it. It's beyond even that. It's the inexplicable energy that creates worlds. It's the thing that is the fluid in the spine of all of life. You are that. I am that. That's what we are. And mysteriously, all of that is somehow housed in this vessel, this finite thing that we call a body that has a personality. But the more that we, on our seeking path, lean into beginner's mind, right? Then the more that we see, okay, this is a vessel, it's an instrument that's temporary, it has a finite nature to it, and it can accept and exhibit all of that pure essence, all of that loving awareness to the degree that it's allowed. So then what doesn't allow it? Fear. And yet here's this repeated lesson that says, be not afraid. Be not afraid. Um, Fear not. And yet we do that often because, come on, we can't help it. We can't help but be seduced and pulled into acts of fear if we don't remember who we are. And so we got to give ourselves some credit because in our forgetfulness, we have crafted some pretty cool things, cool tools in order to help us survive in this dualistic world, right? What are some of those tools? Courage and bravery. Those things are needed in a dualistic plane because as long as I am under the spell that I am David, boy, am I going to have to draw on courage and bravery constantly because I'm going to come up against things all the time that are going to elicit fear within me. I'm going to hear things that are going to elicit a sense of uh, ill will or fear of my personal safety or my rights. Again, that's a part of this relative reality. And yet, here's this other thing that is saying, fear not, be not afraid. And it's like, well, how do we do that when all of these things are seemingly attacking us? When just getting through a human day requires so much. So pause for a moment. The scripture says, be not afraid, not do not afraid, not a physical action in order to overpower or prevent fear, which is what acts of courage and bravery really are. And when you and I continue to face the fear and then battle the fear, all of that battling really is sort of a seduction where we are still fearing our mortality. We are still fearing our death, if you will. And so we become very sophisticated in looking for inspiration and doing acts of bravery and facing our fears and doing all of these things. Again, I'm not mocking those things because I still do those. And yet that's not what the scripture is saying. Because that we're doing, as long as we just think that I'm David or you are you, and that's it, that's the do not fear. But the scripture said, be not afraid. And so that means that I must find a way to reconnect with what I truly am, which is that pure essence, which can't even register fear. I am loving awareness, which knows nothing of separation or the need to preserve, prevent, create boundaries, all of that kind of stuff. So how do we figure out this disconnect here between the do not fear and the be not afraid? Every time then we feel the fear. Sometimes we will pull out of our bag of tricks all the things that were sort of coping mechanisms. And I'm going to say, maybe don't do that now. At least don't do that in your practice. And so you turn to the fear. You and I turn to the fear when it seems as though the money is not there, when it seems as though the illness is not going away, when it seems as though that everything that we had relied on in relationships and other people is about to seemingly burst and flee. We look at each of those things and we go, who am I? Be not afraid. That which is the true me knows nothing of fear. That which is the true me does not need in any way to grab at, to crave, to long, to preserve, to restrict. It's encouraging me to outgrow my idea of self and lean more into the truth of what I am, which is this infinite essence, this pure essence. And you say, how is that possible, David? Well, it is seemingly impossible until those of us who put this into practice put it into practice. Until in those moments where it seems like there's not an answer, you just lean into it and you say, be not afraid. I am loving awareness. And all of the sudden, all of the do not afraid and all of the things and the systems and the coping mechanisms and the craftsmanship that has gone in, it suddenly starts to melt a little bit. And we can go from up here trying to analyze our way into bravery and courage, or analyze our way out of fear into just the recognition that fear is an illusion in and of itself. Let me tell you, it's noisy out there when you're practicing that, because there will be people who say, you're not doing enough. You're not doing it right. You're not concerned enough. You're not this enough. You're not that enough. And that too brings up all of that fear of wanting to people please and not wanting people mad at you. And you just pause and you breathe and you let go of all the need to justify. And you just sort of let it begin to melt down and you go, be not afraid. And you show up. You and I keep showing up in the world fully, but not just as your name, not just as your story, not just as your credential, but we practice showing up as pure essence. We practice showing up as loving awareness, free of agenda, free of the need to please, free of the need for approval, free of the need to try to calculate and mask and fit in, all of that kind of stuff, so that we come into this arena and we go, oh, that's why it was repeated so often. Be not afraid. Be not afraid really only lands in its totality when you and I remember what we are. Otherwise, it's do not afraid. It's just an action item. And we simply don't have the energy to sustain that. We will have ebbs and flows. Maybe we'll have a good year where we push and push and push and our courageousness and our bravery, and we accomplish and we realize that it is impermanent. And so to be not afraid doesn't even distinguish between an ebb and a flow. It just knows the cyclical nature and the beauty of energy and life. Suddenly, we're not so concerned or worried about what's going to happen to me. Why would pure essence ever worry about what's going to happen to me? And we live more and more in a sustainability. Maybe you and I could actually do that for a day. And we can get a little taste of that liberation, and we can get a little taste of that bliss, not the concepts of liberation and freedom, not the concept of bliss, not the thing that is derived from our do not afraid, like look at what I did, which is so vacuous and so momentary. But it's a remembering. It's a remembering of who and what we are. To grow, we have to outgrow. We have to outgrow what ultimately? We have to outgrow all things self-referential, as if this is the totality of anything. It's just a beautiful vessel that we can treat well, that we can learn to love in all of its finiteness, and at the same time, paradoxically hold this energy of this finiteness or this microcosm, and at the same time be fully aware that we are absorbed in the macrocosm. And that is truly God in us, as us, through us. Be not afraid. Be not afraid. Fear not. Practice. Practice the being in the doing. Don't let the doing be the thing that mandates all. And begin to relax and play with that just a little bit more, just a little bit more, just a little bit more. And all of those practices then accumulate. And we can begin to create congruency and remembering the truth that we are pure essence and loving awareness. Let's practice that together. Be not afraid. Blessings.